Hi, well, welcome. Welcome to session on changing tides of international education. My name's Stuart Hamilton, CEO at Ingenuity Partners. Ingenuity, we have clients across the higher education sector who we help with pragmatic IT strategy and technology architecture and delivery. We're very proud to have partnered with Cordit to found the MortarCAPS Higher Learning Data Standard to create new opportunities across the sector to transform student outcomes. I'm joined today by Sarah Lightfoot, CEO at UNSW College, and John Chu, Chief Insight Officer at Navitas. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe pass to John to do the same?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stu, and it's lovely to meet everybody here. Yes, I'm Sarah Lightfoot, CEO of UNSW College. I've worked here at the college and both at the university for, coming on 6 years now, and prior to that was at Navitas with my wonderful colleague or ex-colleague, John Chu, who I will throw to.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Stu. Yeah, John Chu. I'm Chief Insights Officer at Navitas. Prior to this, for those of you who don't know, Navitas, we run private higher education colleges and campuses all around the world. We've got a footprint in about 12 countries now. And prior to this, I was a consultant at Nous Group, working primarily in vet, higher education, and international education more specifically.
Awesome. Well, really great to have you both on this panel. So we know like international education has long been one of Australia's most valuable exports. Economically, one of the biggest industries we have, socially, diplomatically, let's be honest. But we see ever increasing competition as markets globally continue to mature, and we've got various local challenges with domestic caps on numbers and shifting student expectations. It really feels like we're entering a new era for international education. And I think to talk about today, the question is, how does Australian education stay globally competitive and deliver exceptional end-to-end student experience that both supports sustainability and growth? So Sarah, UNSW College plays a really critical role in preparing international students for the Australian education system. From where you sit, what are the most urgent challenges and where do you see untapped opportunity as we rethink the international student strategy?
Sure. Look, thank you. I'll start. I'll start by giving a bit of perspective from the college and, in fact, what's gotten us to where we are today. But I think as we came out of the COVID pandemic and over the last couple of years, we saw sort of boom and potentially boom to bust for the sector, not just within Australia, but with other key markets constraining the international education environment. Certainly for us, part of our survival is to be able to continuously evolve. So we invested a lot in program diversification, and over the course of the next 3 years, we'll roll out a whole new suite of programs delivered in multiple different ways for multiple different markets, domestic and international, different modes. We also, and I think it's critical for the sector as a whole, maintaining that student first mentality, so having students at the core and heart of everything that we do. I think having a competitive edge moving forward, both as destination markets, but also individual institutions, that focus on well-being, academic support, outcomes, jobs is going to be increasingly important. We're also very focused on employability and skills gaps, nation building here in Australia. That's kind of where we're pitching part of our future. But also when we think about our transnational opportunities, both for the college and for UNSW, thinking about where we go, what we might do, and how we support nations to build their internal capacity. So I think there's certainly a big opportunity there. And I guess too, for us, EdTech, using the technology and the data that is now much more readily available to ensure that we're both supporting our students on a journey, but making sure we're really targeted and focused about where we're recruiting from, where we're going to, as I said, in terms of transnational, what programs we're going to be launching. So I think it's collectively, it's about being agile, thinking about what a sustainable baseline looks like, and being prepared to diversify. So have your core, but be prepared to diversify and seize opportunities that might come.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. You talked about, really that student first focus, both at a institution level and more broadly in the market. I mean, we're seeing tighter visa regulations, enrolment caps, really increasing pressure on institutions to provide that really high quality care. But at the same time, you're trying to scale and grow. How can providers generally continue to get that scale without compromising the support and experience? Any models or innovation you're seeing as particularly useful?
I would say, I think I'll share with what we're doing at the college. I think we're working with our board at the moment and our university on what a sustainable core looks like, then looking for new opportunities for growth that are potentially scalable and probably things that are very different to what we do now. But to I guess maximize effectiveness and efficiency and make sure you deliver that high quality service, the academic outcomes, we're looking at a lot of different technology solutions at the moment, and that will support students on their whole student life cycle and journey. So not only giving us insights, but being able to give much more high touch service. I guess that when you've got constrained numbers in a constrained environment, having the best academic product that we can possibly have, the best student services, student support, the best academic outcomes for students. So we're going to invest in that technology to make sure that we can meet their needs, help them to excel, and, leverage off high academic output, I guess, and success for students to diversify in our new spaces.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned data, and you've mentioned tech, you've mentioned later leveraging data and tech, which is all very much John's space. I mean, John, Navitas, you're supporting thousands of international students across a whole range of markets. What are the sort of big macro trends you're seeing globally that should be informing strategies for Australia today and some of the things that Sarah references?
Thanks, Stu. I'll maybe cover three sort of really broad macro trends. Happy to touch on some of those more detailed ones as well. But one positive, two negatives. So the positive is a really sustained demand, right? So international students have been growing steadily for many, many years. And because of the demographic growth that's happening, because countries continue to get more wealthy and the middle class continues to grow throughout the world, and there isn't that high quality education option back home quite often, that demand will be sustained. So we're in the middle of updating some modeling that we do, which will basically say, we went from 2 million to 4 million to 6 million, 6.5 million students globally, international students globally today. We were predicting 8.5 in 2030, and then we'll sort of update the model for 2035, right, 10 years out. So, it'll be a big number. It'll continue to grow. So that's a key trend. Sort of the fundamentals are there. The fundamentals are sound. The two negatives, I think one is not such a big deal, it depends which way it goes, but globalization's definitely slowing. Economic prosperity is kind of on the nose at the moment. Will we tip into a global recession or not? That's a lot of this comes down to foreign policy in the United States and tariffs and what that might do to global prosperity. So that could be a speed bump. You know, when we've gone through economic downturns in the past, the number of students that can afford to study abroad obviously takes a bit of a hit or goes through a bit of a pause. So that's one negative. The other negative is what you and Sarah have already talked about. They're the policies of the destination countries. So if you look across UK with its migration white paper, which is hitting the brakes on migration, making it harder to find pathways to migration. Canada was the first to bring in the CAPS for international students. They've, done a whole 180 in terms of being open to newcomers, as they call them over there. That's really sort of taken a back seat amongst other local priorities. Australia, we've seen it. Thankfully, it wasn't such a huge issue during the election. I mean, it wasn't a race to the bottom around migration or international education, which was good, but it's definitely still on the nose. And of course, the US, with what's going on with Harvard and travel bans and all, a pause on visa interviews. So it's really not unique to Australia. It's a global phenomena, particularly in the big OECD countries, particularly in the big four destinations, right? Australia, UK, Canada, US. It's the end of an era in some ways. We went through an amazing period of openness where, we were really welcoming to students. We were trying to offer them more value and more benefits and post-study work and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, I think even though the demand is going to be sustained, our policies will force us into a more sort of limited growth phase around international education, particularly here in Australia.
Yeah, so as you say, mixed trends there, right? I mean, I agree with you. I think the middle one around economic prosperity is very big unknown for everyone in all sorts of markets, but the other two, I mean, we've got this, on the one hand, this sustained demand for growth in international education. On the other hand, ever more restrictive policies in the destination countries. I mean, given all that, in your view, where should Australian institutions be investing over the next, 3, 4, 5 years to ensure they remain relevant and resilient in that international education space?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and I think we're already seeing this across much of the higher ed sector, I think there's a recalibration of the revenue and cost equation for many institutions, right? In the past, international education was a great service to the students, but it was also a little bit of a magic pudding for the CFOs where, if you had a cost constraint, odds are you could grow your way out of that with international student numbers and just the sheer demand and interest in coming to Australia to study. Same goes with the UK, Canada, to some extent US. I think there's a period of recalibration that's going on where institutions are looking sort of longer term and they're saying, well, there's no big sort of hockey stick recovery here like we saw after previous downturns. It's going to be very contingent on what the government decides. And it's probably going to be pretty modest in terms of what that growth rate is going to be. So I think that's a really important sort of phase that, every, I guess, organization has to go through. If you think about structural change in any industry, which is effectively what we're going through, there's a huge recalibration that has to happen. I think once you've done that and you've sort of reset expectations and you've reset what's possible, then you can sort of be free to start thinking then about new models, different modes of delivery, how do we align to our mission? And the most popular area at the moment is obviously transnational education. So TNE, which UNSW College does definitely punch above its weight in. That's easier to do if you've got realistic expectations around timeframes, risk, return, all of that. And I think it's much more effective as well because you're more likely to be aligned to your mission. you're more likely to be able to bring your staff on the journey. It's not a different magic pudding that you're trying to tap into to replace the I guess the lost opportunities of education, of bringing international students into Australia. So I think they're the couple of sort of big shifts that need to happen on an institutional level before we can really say, okay, what do we want to invest in next?
Yeah, that's a great comment. I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that the kind of every CFO loves a magic pudding. It's always great if there's a path to grow your business that's kind of endless. But I suppose the shadow side to that you're calling out is that it maybe takes the focus off the quality, takes the focus off the delivery, and maybe perhaps the evaporation of the magic pudding might cause a bit of more, examination of what are the outcomes we're actually driving, and maybe ultimately delivering a better product.
Yeah.
I mean, on that specifically, the policy changes here have really sharpened that spotlight on the success of those international student enrolments, how they're managed, how they're supported. What you've mentioned data already, John, and Sarah referenced it as well. What can institutions be doing now to better use their data? Not just for maybe compliance, but actually to support that entire student life cycle from recruitment right through retention, progression, ultimately alumni engagement. I mean, Sarah, maybe do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Look, I would say there's some organisations who already do this particularly well. And interestingly, certainly in the online space, I think there are a number of players that do that quite well because it's so essential, right? Your often online students are not so sticky, and if you've ever gone sort of behind the scenes and looked at the delivery and the follow-up calls and the getting the data insights and seeing where the different touch points are on when how people are feeling about their program and the likelihood of success depending on those very early interactions, it's all very possible. I would say in many institutions, though, it hasn't been done so well. In some cases, they've been particularly overwhelmed by how many students came through, and haven't really had to think about it like that. So it's certainly investing in technology, but I think first taking that step back and really understanding the interlinkages of that whole student life cycle. And, my background's marketing. I've worked in this sector for sort of 20 years. I cannot tell you how many times I have sat in workshops, and I've worked at many different organizations, and we've all philosophically understood the importance of that customer journey and mapped it out, and to the point you'll go into I would say any university or college anywhere in this country and say we're going to do some customer journey mapping, and people will roll their eyes because they've done it before. But it's what we did with that information. And to be fair, we didn't always have the technology and the tools. I don't think people always understood the benefits that could be realised by really nurturing people along that life cycle. I do think it's changed. I do think it's changed significantly. And, we've talked about that constrained environment. So I'll talk from my current experience. We had a workshop last week. We've got another one next week where we're thinking about that interconnectivity and looking at a connected program of work, which is about that interface of, the students. Now, obviously, we're small compared to somewhere like Navitas or to a big university, but I think collectively, we realise how important that is, and to identify the students at risk early on to make sure that they're supported, to ensure that we retain them. So, it's a win-win situation if you're doing that. We're doing a lot more in the peer mentoring space, the study clubs, the extra support. We're utilising people, but also AI to do that as well. So we've already got a lot of different tools at every step of the journey, but now we're putting them all together and having that sort of hopefully one day seamless journey, leveraging the technology that's available to us and much more readily available than it ever was.
Yeah. John, do you want to comment on this one? This is an area you spend a lot of your time in.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time still looking and interpreting the data, less so in sort of wrangling the data. But I have a lot of appreciation for a lot of what Sarah has already said, which is, I mean, before you can get into any sort of meaningful insights or start to tell a story around the data, there's 70% of the effort kind of goes into just the very unglamorous task of preparing it and linking it up and making sure it's all connected and talking to each other. So when you talk about sort of that whole of life cycle view of the student, I think there are great examples of institutions that have done really powerful things at different stages. So whether, maybe getting a really complete picture at the top end of the funnel, getting a really good picture of sort of conversion and commencement, and maybe, very good sort of student analytics and students at risk. I'm not sure that anyone's really cracked the full integration end to end to be able to tell, this student who's struggling with this particular subject, came from, this particular part of the world, and maybe they're missing some of the cultural nuance or their family backgrounds, quite different to what they're contending with in the classroom now. So that's probably not a great example, but as an example of an idea of that end-to-end view, I think we're still getting there, and leaders within the organization and people who love data like Sarah and myself, I think we just need to be really patient to say there's a lot of unglamorous work that has to happen just to get these data sets linking and talking to each other, and then the magic will come, right? But until that happens, it usually takes more time than you think, and more money than you think, and more effort than you think. And then one day it's all there, and it's amazing, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And then you add a new product, a new offering, a new channel, and all that work, you gotta integrate that in again and create, make all that beautiful life cycle work across now another channel, another output, another endpoint. So you're always adding silos if you're very, very deliberate about that work. Yeah. So thinking about that, thinking about new channels, thinking about some of that, the silos in the products and all of those things that are happening, those cross-sector partnerships, right, between institutions, with EdTech, with government, with industry, it's increasingly vital to deliver on, what Sarah was talking about, some of those, making sure you're getting the right skills to support the nation building, all those things. Have you got examples of where you've seen these working particularly well to support international students? And what role do you see those partnerships playing in as we kind of reimagine this future in the new era that we're talking about? John, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I guess speaking sort of from a somewhat biased sort of Navitas point of view, most of our business is focused on partnering with universities. So as a private higher education provider, finding partners around the world in terms of, our amazing universities, and exploring with them, what are some of the challenges they're facing, particularly around international education, and how can we support them best. And the original model, of course, was similar to UNSW College, which was the pioneer in this space. What sort of pathway programs can we offer and find the students who, really aspire to coming to this particular university, whether it's Griffith or Deakin or La Trobe or Canberra, and saying to them, look, you've got potential here. You're missing some of the prerequisites, or maybe you don't feel like you're ready. you can come into a Navitas environment, get the support and then transition in and succeed, within the university mainstream. So that's been a proven model, and we're continuing to build on that. A big part of what we do now today is actually helping to deliver on transnational sort of delivery models, in particular, full service offshore campuses. So Curtin Singapore is one really great example that we've been working with Curtin University with for a long time. You spoke about some of the, your earlier question before was some of these broader market trends. I think there's a very clear appetite now for students throughout the world, and in particular, parts of Asia and South Asia, North Asia, where they're looking at options to study with a great institution that's a bit closer to home. So that transnational model and the confidence in terms of saying, at least at an undergraduate level, but possibly at a postgraduate level as well, this is a great option. I kind of have my cake and eat it because I can study at home or closer to home. I'm, closer to family, closer to my support structures, but I'm getting an international experience and I'm getting a first-rate qualification that's really recognized and mobile, and that model, that's another sort of area where Navitas has continued to really invest in. I think the last one I'll mention, which is very much part of this sort of new managed era that we live in, how do institutions partner with government? I think for a long time, it was, largely a sort of free market approach to international education, you could say. There was, obviously various bits of regulation and the ESOS Act and other things that governed our sector. But I think we're going through another phase where, institutions, professional associations, peak bodies, we've got to get back into the mode of putting our thinking caps on and being really proactive and constructive and saying to the government, if you're looking for ideas around how to address particular policy priorities, we're here to help and we're keen to be a part of that conversation and not just sort of sit back and sort of be critical of the ideas that come out in the absence of that engagement. So I think that's another form of partnering that I think really needs to come to the fore, in this next little while.
That's great. Sarah, do you want to expand on any of those partnerships?
Look, sure. I mean, John covered it pretty well. I guess I would the point about the government partnerships, I think John talked about transnational education, and he knows we've talked about this, that as part of the work I do with the university is thinking about their transnational strategy, and I think in that space, collaborating with government as well as third parties, like Navitas, is really key. And part of that is to thinking about the rationale and why certain nations potentially are opening up to have foreign providers come in and deliver education, and often it's about their own nation building and skills gaps and their ambitions. And so I think that it's really critical to be understanding of their needs as well as your own needs. So sometimes I fear that in Australia or in anywhere that is a sort of mature destination market, that we think, okay, we can take it to the world and realize our own ambitions, but it's about understanding what the ambitions of the potential host country are. I would also say I have seen some successful different modes and models even in delivering transnational, and I'm going to cross over that online and T&E, because we debate about this often at the university. By definition, transnational is where the awarding institution or the learner is not in the same country as the awarding institution. So there's that sort of Venn where there's online. I think it's grey, right? And you're seeing study centres and study hubs and hybrid delivery in a transnational environment. And I guess I would say one size doesn't fit all. And the work that we're doing, we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about different markets, different modes, different models. And sometimes government policies aren't conducive to, don't recognise online delivery, for example. So that might wipe out particular modes of delivery. Sometimes the capacity to do it in terms of the technology infrastructure isn't there. But in other places, a sort of hybrid model is, so T&E delivering offshore, but in a sense, hybrid works particularly well. So I think you've just really got to think about where you're going, why you're going there. Are you meeting the needs of that nation and that nation's learners, not just your own? I personally love the sort of third-party collaboration, whether it's with tech companies or organisations like a Navitas, where you're bringing together expertise within this sector. We're not jack of all trades, we're actually masters, right? And certain institutions are masters of their own thing. So I think that collaboration, bringing together skills and experiences that we don't have or a university doesn't have, and partnering, whether it's with a third-party provider or a tech organisation to deliver in that space is mission critical. And I think we'll see more of it moving forward, because I'm just not sure alone it's easy to navigate such a complex environment.
Yeah, I love that. I suppose thinking through, it's not something I'd ever thought of, but it feels like when you're talking about those, I suppose other governments thinking about building their nation, it's almost like you've got another customer there, right? You've got your students as customers, you've got industries as customers, and now you've got potentially other governments in other nations that they become a customer. So what are they after out of these transnational offerings? What are they looking for from the students that come out of it? So like this whole other party you've got to think about and go back to first principles and what are they trying to achieve? Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Just to remind those online, the Q&A is open. There's a little box at the top of the screen that says Q&A. You can post in there any questions you have of our presenters today. In the meantime, while we wait for any questions to come in, I think we've covered this a lot in the way you've talked about things like the transnational education. You talked about the hybrid modes. I guess interesting for me to think about your thoughts on essentially the evolution of the product. We've talked a lot about different modes of product delivery, but if we think traditionally the product of an education institution is the degree that comes out the end, how do you see the actual the product potentially evolving in this new market, this new era, these different forms of delivery? Do you see fundamental changes to potentially the offerings that universities have for international students? Sarah, I think, do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Yes and no. So on the one hand, absolutely yes. I think students of today want different things to students of yesterday and tomorrow. So I do think, and you see this in many organisations, and you look at what's happening in especially the lifelong learning space and the stackable credentials, and then LinkedIn Learning and Google and all sorts of things. There's extraordinary possibility and opportunities for students to kind of choose their own adventure and have really quite extraordinary learning experience, somewhat tailored to their needs. Then I will go to the other end of a spectrum. I still also think that, education for many is that experience of being in person and connecting with peers in person. And some would say at my university, an undergrad degree is a bit of a rite of passage. And I think there's room for, I guess what I'm saying, there's room for both. And it's how they work together to create opportunities that incorporate both. And I'll give a real example. I'm doing a co-presentation to the University Academic Board next week. And we've got kind of a Venn diagram, which is T&E, the college, and lifelong learning. And we're focused on the bits that are the crossover in the middle, and where we can learn from each other through stackable credentials and different modes of delivery. Actually, could we build a whole subject in one of my new programs taken out of the lifelong learning university catalogue, and therefore leverage off each other and create efficiencies in terms of the design, etc. That's just one example. And the other thing I'll say before I throw to John, I had a fabulous visit to Singapore, visiting some various different providers in Singapore. And there was one place that I went to, one institution, and they had incredible sort of course design and analytics and really mapping out a student journey. And it was kind of what I'm talking about, giving a bit of that hybrid between the two. So it was a face-to-face, predominantly, traditional learning, but how they use technology. So students would come in and think, when I graduate, I want to be an accountant, and they have a learning path of where these students can go and what subjects they think one, to meet the requirements of the degree, that's important, but what pathway they should go on. And it sort of maps them, and it maps how they're performing in particular electives and subjects, or where they're showing strengths, or where they've got weaknesses. And then they can intervene and kind of say, gosh, you wanted to do accounting, but you're thriving in humanities and history. Do you want to consider this journey? But it could still be a different opportunity and pathway that takes you back to that outcome, which might not have been an accountant, but potentially working in business, but in a different capacity. And they've got this for each individual student. They've got this map of extraordinary, like it's an individual map, like a spider web on where you can go. And then they're offering different modes of delivery within that map. And so I think that's like outstanding, kind of cutting edge use of technology, and really understanding of people and their needs and what they're trying to achieve. And it also, it probably gives the best possible academic outcomes and the best possible chance of success, which for the institution is also a win. So I think the world is changing and we have to adapt to it. But I think there's kind of room for everything, but designing how they all fit together is going to be the piece that's interesting for me.
Yeah, for sure. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree with everything that Sarah said, particularly, the experience for an international student has to span that sort of very personal, transformative rite of passage, journey of self-discovery, establishment of independence. That's a key component of it. And I would add to that, getting drunk, falling in love, all of those other things that need to happen as well, all the way through to the very, I guess, tangible outcome of getting a great first job. And that's kind of the full spectrum. I think if you were to ask the student, and if you were to look at the data, you'd say that employment outcome still lags behind. And that's probably where a lot of a lot of the focus continues to be, and appropriately so needs to be, on how do we close the gap between the employment outcomes of an international student graduating from the same course is poorer, and we can see this in the census data and other places, than the same domestic student doing the same course, living in the same place, and them graduating and what they're able to achieve. So the international student tends to end up with a job that's less relevant, that may not be, within the discipline or industry that they studied for, may not get paid the same, and may take longer to sort of arrive at as well. So lots of indicators to suggest that there is a gap. That's not all on the institution. I think there's, part of it is on Australian businesses not understanding the visas that are at play, some biases against, particular accents or, other sorts of underlying cultural issues. So it's not just on the institutions, but I think, if we were to think about courseware and, how we develop our students, there's I think a growing appreciation that the more experience we can give them, the more work integrated learning, the more sort of real world experience we can give them, the more we can build their networks and mentor them, the more they'll start to sort of see that first job being a really, really good outcome, which it isn't at the moment.
That's an awesome summary of kind of everything we've talked about and what you're trying to achieve as the market evolves, right? And I think reflecting back on some of the things we've touched on through that, as we've said, for most institutions, actually connecting the data across that full life cycle to really understand, well, where did the student get into the university from? What was their entry path? How did they prepare for university? What courses did they undertake through that? What experience did they have? What additional non-academic things supported them? And then if you have all of that and then can connect it into what was the outcome for them, then you start to get some data that says, okay, these things have material impact on that outcome we're trying to deliver. And then you've got the tools to have those conversations with the governments that you've talked about, build those partnerships and say, this is what we need to be investing in. This is why, this is the nation building outcome we can drive. So it's a great wrap up of everything we've said, I think. So awesome. Well, that's time. Thank you both very much for taking the time today. It was a great conversation. Really good to hear your insights on this. And lovely to see you both.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you both. That was really lovely.
For attending.
Cheers.
See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.